as we celebrate Pride Month, civil society organizations, including Dynamix and IRANTI, have recently won the bid to host the 2024 ILGA World Conference. It's described as the largest global gathering of queer changemakers and is aiming to advance equality around the world. Now, this is the second time that South Africa in particular will host the event following the 1999 event itself. The conference will take place in Cape Town. Joining us now for more on this is the acting co-director at IRANTI. That's Jade Jacobs, who's with us via our video link today. Jade, it's great to have you on the program. Thank you so much indeed for making time to chat to us. Exciting times, I guess, in the lead up to 2024. It's a timely conversation during Pride Month, as it were. But as I said there in that introduction, it's been described as the largest global gathering of queer change makers, as it were. Tell us a bit more about it, because my understanding is that the conference itself has been around for more than 2 decades.
Absolutely. So yeah, ILGA World is like the largest, as you said, the largest sort of, I guess, organization that hosts or that, embodies a bunch of LGBTIQ organizations and members. It's the largest one in the world, and they really do significant work all over the world. So the ILGA World Conference has actually been running since 1978. But in that period, as you also said, Africa has only hosted the conference once, and that was in 1999. So that's about 25 years ago, and that was held in Johannesburg. So the fact that we've won is quite significant and quite an important step for us as the African LGBTIQ plus community.
Yeah, speaking about Africans who are part of the community itself, we do know that there are still more than 30 countries on the continent that criminalize, I guess, what's been described as sex among people of the same sex, as it were. And I wonder to what extent you are worried that might affect who is able to participate in this conference when it's back on the continent.
Sure, absolutely. So I think like the way that the conference is structured, there are ways and means of ensuring that everyone is able to participate. And I think particularly the fact that it is being hosted here in South Africa and it's being hosted by Dynamix and IRANTI is quite important as well, because us two organizations, we have really good relationships within government, with our government stakeholders, and especially with DIRCO. And so I think that relationship over the next 2 years, we will have to solidify and strengthen that relationship to ensure that we can have a meaningful and super engaging participation of African queer people in this space. So that's how we're planning to work around that. I mean, of course, it's quite risky to openly say in some spaces that people are being invited to an LGBTIQ event. And so we kind of figure out ways of working around that, the wording and the language that we use when we are inviting people to these conferences.
Sure, interesting indeed. If memory serves me well, there was an LGBTIQ conference that was meant to be held in London this year, beg your pardon. Would this be the same conference? Because I understand that one was cancelled because of a row, essentially, over the, conversion therapy that some people were worried about, that the government and the government stance there.
Sure. So I think we've seen, as much as the world is kind of progressing in some ways, there are parts of the world, and it seems somewhat in the West, kind of where there seems to be a kind of regression that's happening, and that I think is something that's happening. We saw it with Roe versus Wade in the US, and then also now with what you're mentioning in London. Yeah, it's kind of messy, but I think we just need to continue doing the work that we do. So I think for us, trying to start at home in South Africa and Africa is quite important to us. But to answer your question, no, it's not the same conference. The ILGA World Conference was just held in May, at the beginning of May in LA, where we actually had the opportunity to present our bid in person at the conference.
Yeah, it does shine a spotlight nonetheless on the kind of relationship that governments typically have with queer activists, as it were. And I guess you've touched on it by, alluding to the idea of starting at home and at grassroots levels. The long-standing criticism against any kind of conference is that it just ends up as a talk shop. I mean, what are the outcomes that you're hoping will come out of the ILGA conference once it gets to Cape Town?
Okay. So, I think South Africa, we kind of are at an advantage in terms of we have our constitution which protects the LGBTIQ community. And we have quite good relationships with government, like with the Department of Home Affairs, Department of Justice. We've got quite solid relationships there. But I think that this is actually like an opportunity to challenge South Africa and to challenge our government and other state actors and stakeholders in terms of how are we working as a country to actually go out into the rest of Africa, and how are we defending LGBTIQ plus human rights in the rest of Africa? How are we trying to counter the conservative narratives and agendas that exist in Africa? What strides are we making to ensure that there are policy protections and legislation changes, not only in South Africa, but also in Africa? We do have partnerships with organizations, LGBTIQ organizations in other countries, where we try to kind of impact change in like similar ways that we've done it here in South Africa. And I think that hosting the ILGA World Conference is a way of engaging with the people who will be with us, and engaging with government as well, our South African government, and seeing how we can push the strides that we've already made towards the rest of Africa.
Yeah. Very quickly there, Jade, the queer community, like any community, is not exempt from, let's call it, hostilities, challenges, modes of oppression that exist in any heteronormative context, as it were. In fact, we've had many activists who are worried that sometimes spaces created by queer people, for queer people, end up becoming violent spaces themselves. And I think you know what I mean by violence. I'm not talking about guns and weapons, as it were, but they reproduce the forms of oppression that exist outside those spaces. How worried are you about that in the lead up to 2024?
I'm not too worried about it, honestly. I mean, of course, there's a lot of there's an internalization of queer phobia, I guess, within the queer community, and that is something that we will need to think about and we'll need to deal with. But I'm not concerned about it, because I think that both IRANTI and Gender Dynamics, we've been doing this. I mean, Gender Dynamics is the oldest trans organization in South Africa, and IRANTI, we are turning 10 this month, in fact, and we've done a lot of work on the continent when it comes to protecting LGBTIQ people. We've hosted events and we've also hosted conferences, both organizations respectively, and I think that one of the reasons for partnering on this is because working together will obviously strengthen how we can counter and ensure that those kinds of violences don't occur in the space. So, yeah, I think we have a pretty solid team that's working towards this. We've also got the support of other partners within the region who are on board to assist us and to ensure that we have an accessible space for everybody.
Jade Jacobs, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. All the very best. You've got your work cut out for you, and I hope it goes better than expected. Jade is the acting co-director at IRANTI.